This Saturday at noon Eastern Time, 11 a.m. local time in the Central Time Zone, we have the 5-3, 3-2 in Big Ten play Minnesota Golden Gophers, who are riding the hot hand of Max Brosmer and their awesome passing defense, traveling the road to take on the 24th ranked 6-2, 3-2 overall in Big Ten play Illinois Fighting Illini, who have won a lot of close games and who are well coached, but they are coming off of a massive blowout loss to the Oregon Ducks, the number one team in the country, on the road. This is a critical matchup because it is a point that is a fork in the road for both programs. As I said, Minnesota is riding a hot hand. Max Brosmer has been successful. He's gotten better as the year has gone on. Their rushing offense has at times picked up some steam, and their passing defense rather has consistently been solid and one of the better passing defenses in the Big Ten and in the country. And they've had a lot of young players who we'll be talking about in this video step up and make plays for them. They're riding the hot hand. They have a lot of momentum here, and a win over Illinois gives them bowl eligibility, gives them a better regular season record than what they had last year, which was 5-7, and it takes even more air out of the tires for Illinois. But if the Illini can earn a win against Minnesota, it takes some of that momentum away from the Gophers because, well, Brett Bielema will have won his fourth game in a row against PJ Fleck, and Illinois would have a guaranteed winning regular season record. And, well, they would beat another team that they should beat. They should beat Minnesota. It's a home game. Illinois has a superior record. Illinois has had PJ Fleck in Minnesota's number over the past few seasons. So even though Minnesota opened up as a 1.5-point favorite and the line has moved in their favor, Minnesota right now is laying 3 points. Minnesota's favored -3 on the road in Champaign and Memorial Stadium. And even though Minnesota is given a 54.5% chance to win this game, Minnesota should expect to win this game, but so should Illinois. And that's what is great about this Big Ten matchup. Former Big Ten West matchup, by the way, that will be streamed on FS1 again this Saturday, noon Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Central Time. We're going to talk about this matchup. I'm going to give you my preview, what I think the critical matchup is, my analysis on these teams, and also a prediction at the end. And the last time these two teams met, it was somewhat of a toxic Walmart Big Ten West. It's a weird jumble of words, but I think it makes sense to you all who watched the game. Shootout in 2023. Illinois won that game 27-26 in Minneapolis. Before we get to this video, I want you all, if you can, to please hit that like button to help us get into the algorithm. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I imagine many of you have watched the show, you enjoy it, but maybe you're not subscribed because sometimes it's hard to remember whether you're subscribed or not. So please double check that and click the subscribe button. Also hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we release new content here on College Football with Sam. Share this video around to other college football fans you know who are passionate about the sport, and therefore they're going to love the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, and that's thanks to you. You helped this channel past 20,000 subscribers, and you helped build it up into the machine that it is evolving into. And we believe here on College Football with Sam that we can evolve into the best college football channel on YouTube with your help. And you can do that by sharing this video around, and again, liking, subscribing, hitting the bell, and also commenting your thoughts down below so that I and others can engage with you and we can have a beautiful back and forth conversation. And lastly, join the Discord server. It's free. We talk college football 24/7 in there. The link to that is in the description or down below in the pinned comment. If you want to support the channel monetarily, because I know some of you can do that, you're able to and you want to, you can post a super comment down in the comment section below, or sign up as a paid member on our Patreon page, or purchase merchandise like this, for example, or maybe your Big Ten school colors as a t-shirt, themed in a t-shirt, down in the merchandise store. And the merchandise store and the Patreon page links are in the description and also in the pinned comment at the top of the comment section, just where the Discord server is. Thank you for doing all those things, and let's look at the broad picture, the big picture here. View the forest, view its beauty, and then we zoom in. We zoom in to the little trees, the different plants, the different animals, the details, the players, the coaches. But power ratings and broad details, the big picture, they give us some insight here. And Minnesota, despite the fact that they have an additional loss and they haven't played, Minnesota has not played a Penn State. They have not played an Oregon. They haven't played in an Autzen Stadium or Beaver Stadium all season long. I thought they would at this point in the year because in the preseason I thought Michigan would be a Penn State or Oregon caliber team. But alas, they are not. And the best win that Minnesota has is over a USC team at home who right now is 4-4 and has had a habit this year of losing some close games, of improving on defense, but being somewhat mediocre on the offensive side of the ball. Illinois has suffered 2 dominant losses to Penn State and Oregon, and they have practically beaten everyone else in one-score games, at least everyone else that mattered. Purdue, rival, one-score win. Michigan, it was 21-7, but it felt more like a one-score win than anything else. They beat Kansas by 6. They beat Nebraska by 7 in overtime. They are a well-coached team, and they are clutch, and they have some underrated elements to them. Minnesota has underrated elements to them, and I think recently they have clutched up in their own way. They're viewed as 7.4 points better than the average college football team right now per FPI, and 9.1 points better than the average college football team per S&P+. Illinois is only viewed as 6.3 points better than the average college football team in FPI, and 3.4 points better than the average college football team per S&P+. In Minnesota, they had a massive win that I didn't have really the time to cover, but it was a big win regardless, and I watched parts of it. Really the first half. I watched a lot of the first half, and at that point, well, as we all know, it was 34-10 Minnesota at the half, and there were other games on, so I kind of checked out, watched a bit of the fourth quarter, saw that Maryland was moving the ball down the field, I presume, on Minnesota's backups. Minnesota forced a bunch of turnovers. They had a pick 6 early, and they got a big, and I mean big lead early, and Maryland could just never, ever recover from it. 48-23 win over the Maryland Terrapins, who fall to 4-4, 1-4 in conference play. As for Illinois, 38-9 loss to Oregon, where Oregon looked like the best team in the country, and Illinois clearly has limitations to them. So this is an inflection point, I think, for both of these programs. This is a fork in the road for both the Gophers and the Illini, for PJ Fleck and for Brett Bielema. This is one of those games where both of these coaches, I think Fleck a little bit more than Bielema, but still both of these coaches need this game here. And both of these teams are pretty similar. Minnesota has a points per play margin of 0.104. For every one of Minnesota's plays, they score a little more than a tenth more of a point compared to the average points that their opponent scores per play. Illinois has a points per play margin of 0.023. Now, a big reason why Illinois is 6-2 and they're so low in points per play margin is a lot of their wins, especially against FBS teams. The FCS result that Illinois had against Eastern Illinois is not counted in points per play margin. They were close competitive matchups. And then as for Penn State and Oregon, I mean, they statistically destroyed Illinois. For Penn State, it wasn't necessarily reflected in the box score because they hadn't found their kicker yet. They failed on some fourth downs, but statistically, they owned Penn State. They baned Penn State. And then for Oregon, that was pretty obvious that they also baned. They baned Illinois. I think I may have said baned Penn State. Penn State baned Illinois. Oregon baned Illinois as well. But they still have a positive points per play margin because, well, they're a good team. They're an efficient team. They have an EPA margin of 0.055. Minnesota has an EPA, expected points added margin of 0.085. So both of these opponents on an average basis are winning football teams. They're above average to good football teams. Not great, not near elite, not elite. And again, as for how interesting this matchup is, let's talk about it some more. In game control, they're similar. Minnesota is 54th in game control. Illinois is 36th. Illinois has played the 13th toughest strength of schedule. Minnesota's only played the 78th toughest strength of schedule. So the Illini are clearly more battle-tested, especially given that they played Penn State and Oregon, who I think are two top 4 teams right now. They played them on the road. And playing Oregon on the road when you're used to playing in the Midwest is tough. especially when it's an afternoon game and Autzen is as loud as it gets. And they played Penn State at night in a really wannabe mock whiteout environment. It wasn't the official whiteout, but the environment was basically the same. And those are tough environments against tough, I would say near elite at worst, to elite at the very best teams. They're a very battle-tested squadron, Illinois is. And that's why, despite their blowout losses, they're 36th in game control. Game control is basically how would each team in college football do? It's kind of a measurement of dominance in a way. I can't remember exactly how it's phrased by ESPN, but game control, it's how you lead your opponents, it's how you beat your opponents. It measures dominance, basically, adjusted for strength of schedule. And Illinois, while not a top 25 team per game control, they're pretty close. Minnesota hasn't played enough great opponents to be highly respected by game control. Yes, their game against Maryland was impressive. I watched that. They broke off a long run. They did a very good job of protecting Brosmer. Brosmer had a QBR of over 90. He basically played a near perfect game. I don't know how sustainable that is, but they do have Elijah Spencer. They do have Daniel Jackson. Darius Taylor's gotten involved in the passing game. They do have some impressive weapons in their passing attack, whether that's their offensive tackle, Iriante Irsay, whether that's their quarterback, running back, some of the receivers they got. Illinois is kind of the same way outside of the offensive tackle position. So it's interesting that these teams are built in a similar way, honestly. But Illinois has home field advantage. The Illini are the more battle-tested team. Minnesota, though, as I've already said, they have the momentum. They're riding the hot hand. And the matchup here that both teams need to exploit in order to win, I think it's Illinois' rushing offense against Minnesota's defense. And it's interesting because both of these teams are better, much better, at passing the football than running the football. Much better. I would have believed that preseason with Illinois because of the receivers they have and the fact that it was likely that Luke Altmaier was at least going to improve in some way. And they also got two really good offensive tackles through the portal, J.C. Davis being one of them. For Minnesota, though, I thought with what they returned on the offensive line, the fact that they develop well there typically, and that they brought back Darius Taylor and their blocking tight end Nick Calderup, I thought that they would have a pretty good rushing offense, especially with the moves they made in the portal, acquiring like 3 running backs so that Darius Taylor wouldn't have to carry the whole load and that he could be healthy. Well, Minnesota, they're not running the football well. They're not running the football well at all. I mean, even against Maryland. And Maryland's defense, guys, it's not a good defense. If you take out their 51, I think it was a 51-yard run, maybe my memory isn't correct there, but it was a long run of around 50. You take that out, Minnesota was not even running for 4 yards per carry on them. They weren't. And that's concerning when you have Darius Taylor and when you have some of the talent they do at running back and on the offensive line. However, as we all know, Daniel Jackson's been having a good season. Max Brosmer's had some pretty good games. He's playing better than Ethan Kaliakmanis is at Rutgers, and then compared to Ethan Kaliakmanis' 2023 season with the Gophers. So Minnesota definitely made the right decision there. A hard one, but the right one in moving on from Kaliakmanis and in bringing in Max Brosmer. Minnesota this year, they are outside the top 100 in rushing attempts per game, in rushing yards per game. They only average 3.7 yards per carry, which is 95th. That's lower than Illinois, 3.8. Illinois has played better teams. They've faced a tougher strength of schedule. They've played elite rushing defenses in Oregon and Penn State. Oregon's on the interior at D tackle, and their linebackers have gotten impressive as they've been healthy. And Penn State just kind of everywhere, if we're being honest. And they're running for more yards per carry than Minnesota is. That's not something I would have ever expected to say in the preseason or even earlier this year when Minnesota showed some signs of struggling in the trenches, specifically at run blocking against North Carolina when they showed that. I thought that when Darius Taylor came back in the following week or so that they would improve. They haven't. They just haven't. I think that Illinois does have the better rushing attack this season. And I think that Minnesota's rushing defense has shown that they are vulnerable. So when you have two underrated passing offenses Minnesota, I think, has the better secondary, but I think Illinois can find ways to pass on Minnesota's secondary. It's one of the better passing offenses that Minnesota has faced all season long. And Illinois, their secondary has done a pretty good job of forcing some turnovers all season long. Their secondary is a strong part of their defense. It's stronger than their front, in my opinion. So I think that the passing offenses here, the passing games are sort of set. I think what's going to break this game open is the trenches. And whether that is pass rush, whether that's run stoppage, whether it's these offenses being able to run the football, I think the most likely rushing offense to kind of break this game open is actually Illinois'. Especially since Luke Altmaier, a huge part of the reason Illinois has a better rushing offense than Minnesota, is their quarterback, Luke Altmaier, who is mobile. He reminds me a little bit of Stetson Bennett, if I'm being honest, with the fact that he's slim. He doesn't intimidate you exactly as a runner, but you know he has that ability, and he's agile. He can scamper away, pick up a first down. I really like Luke Altmaier as a quarterback in the same way that by the end of Stetson Bennett's career at Georgia, I really liked him, really, as a college quarterback. I think that's the critical matchup because you see here Minnesota's rushing defense on the season. They've led 3.9 yards per carry, 45th, 7 rushing first downs per game, 36th, 135 rushing yards per game, 51st. Illinois is actually worse, 4.8 opponent yards per carry, 94th, 10.3 opponent rushing first downs per game, 114th. Opponent rushing yards per game, they allow 171, which is 91st. They're worse than Minnesota in all of those categories, but again, Oregon, Penn State, right now, they have some of the best rushing offenses in the country. The best rushing offense that Minnesota has played all season long, it's Iowa, honestly. Iowa and then Michigan. And Iowa's rushing offense is up there. It's really good. But when you look at Penn State and when you look at Oregon, what they do running the ball against superior competition is more sustainable than what Iowa does. And what Iowa does on the ground is very impressive, but that has more so to do with Caleb Johnson than anything else. For Penn State and Oregon, their offensive lines are just a thing of beauty, and they have the passing offense to keep you honest on defense when you want to stack the box and slow down their intimidating rushing attack. So I think that's the matchup here. Illinois' running back and offensive line group, which has also struggled in pass protection, against Minnesota's defense. If Illinois wants to win this game, remember, they're the underdog here. Despite being ranked and Minnesota is not, and despite being at home, they're the underdog. That is how Illinois is going to pull off a spread upset, and how Minnesota is going to pull off a upset in terms of AP and coaches poll ranking is slow down Illinois' rushing attack, because Minnesota's secondary, well, I think Illinois will have some plays against them. It won't be that much. Illinois, if they want to win this game, is going to have to run the football. They can't only pass the ball, because Minnesota is 4th, ladies and gentlemen, in opponent yards per completion, only allowing 9.5. And they're 14th in opponent yards per pass attempt, only allowing 5.9. And that is with a sack percentage that is outside the top 50, and that is with opponents completing 62.31% of their passes on Minnesota, which is also outside the top 50. But Minnesota is 11th in opponent passing yards per game, only allowing 169, and they're 12th in opponent average team passer rating, only allowing a 108.5 opponent passer rating. Illinois, by comparison, is outside of the top 50 in both of those categories that I named. So Minnesota's defense has taken big steps forward. It has. Illinois' passing offense has. And conversely, Minnesota's rushing offense has taken steps back from where it was last season. This is a big-time matchup for both of these teams. It may not be viewed as such on the national scale, but here on College Football with Sam, we view this as a big-time matchup, believe me. I'm excited to watch this game, and Penn State, Ohio State is the biggest game of the week. That's what my eyes are going to be glued to, but on the secondary TV, I will have this game on, and I will be paying attention to it. On offense, let's take a deeper dive. I would take Minnesota in running the ball and at every position on the offensive line. I think that a big part of the reason why Minnesota has struggled to run the ball is the interior of the offensive line, which has not been it hasn't been good, but Illinois has not been either. The reason I'm taking Minnesota overall in the offensive line is for a variety of factors. I think that Minnesota is much better at pass protection at every position. So even if Illinois is slightly better at run blocking, as the strength of schedule adjusted statistics would say they are, Minnesota did a pretty good job against Michigan. I know Josiah Stewart was out in that game, but they did a pretty good job against a really good Michigan front at protecting Brosmer, especially at the end of the game. They, ever since that North Carolina game, have improved in pass protection. And I think they just overall have a offensive line that has some good pieces to it. Both of these lines are not good, and they're disappointing, I think, especially for the coaches that they have. Brett Bielema and PJ Fleck, when I think of those coaches, I do think of physical football. And these offensive lines are not playing to the caliber that I expected them to. Especially, I want to harp on this, especially Minnesota's offensive line. I mean, look at the sack percentages that they allow in passing offense here. Minnesota's sack percentage is 85th on 6.9% of their quarterback dropbacks. Minnesota takes a sack. For Illinois, that's far worse, though. On 10.6% of their dropbacks, they allow a sack. That's 127th. Illinois gives up 3.3 sacks per game. Minnesota gives up 2.3 sacks per game. And again, you look at the rushing offense, and Illinois does lead, but it's not by that much. And a part of the reason why I think Illinois leads Minnesota is also because Minnesota is 118th in rushing attempts per game. They only average 29.1 carries per game. Meanwhile, they average 30.9 pass attempts per game. They are passing the ball more than running the ball. And part of me thinks that it's because Minnesota is having less success running the ball, but I also think that they're interested in generating a passing offense that can consistently keep defenses honest and that can win games for them. Not just keep defenses honest, but a passing offense that can win games for them. I still, though, would take Illinois' quarterback. I would take their wide receivers. I think tight end is a push. Both of these offenses do have a variety of questions because when your offensive lines are questionable, your offense is questionable. The offensive line is a unit, is the most important unit on offense. It just is. It's the same thing with the D-line for the defense. The most important player on the offense is certainly the quarterback, but the offensive line makes up 5 players. That's almost half of your players on offense are in your trenches, and if they're not functioning well, your quarterback is going to be under duress constantly. And you're going to have other players step up and carry the offense, which can work sometimes in some situations, but is ultimately not sustainable here. Max Brosmer leads the Gophers in passing yards with 1,776, 1776. It's a nice American number. And he completes 69.5% of his throws, averages 7.3 yards per pass attempt. He has 12 passing touchdowns, 4 interceptions, a 143.9 passer rating. He's done a pretty good job, especially in recent weeks, of being accurate, and he's certainly an upgrade over Ethan Kaliakmanis from last season. Darius Taylor, no surprise here, leads the team in rushing yards with 513. He's averaging 4.9 yards per carry, and he has 7 rushing touchdowns. He also has 257 receiving yards, averaging 7.6 yards per reception, and 2 receiving touchdowns through the year. So Darius Taylor has gotten involved in the receiving game, in the passing game. Same with running back Marcus Major, who also has over 100 receiving yards. Daniel Jackson leads the team in receiving yards with 568, averaging 11.1 yards per reception. He has 3 receiving touchdowns. Elijah Spencer leads the team in receiving touchdowns with 4, and he also has 354 receiving yards and averages 12.6 yards per reception. On the Illini side of things, Luke Altmaier leads the team in passing yards with 1,667. He completes 63.1% of his throws, averages 7.7 yards per pass attempt, 15 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He had a bad game against Oregon with no passing touchdowns, but 2 picks. One of them was an awful interception. Still has a 147.7 passer rating, though. He's done well in basically all of his games. He even carried Illinois to a win against Purdue after they collapsed. He's done well, in my opinion, in all of his games except for Oregon, which was a horrible game. And against Penn State, he had a below-average performance when you look at his QBR, which is only a 30 for. Took 7 sacks against Penn State. He's taken 10 combined sacks against the top 10 opponents that he's played. That's not a winning strategy, to circle back to the offensive line. He has 136 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and that's factoring in the sack yards that he's taken. He has negative 144 sack yards. So add that in, and he has 280 rushing yards on the year, 2 rushing touchdowns. So he often helps Illinois extend drives, helps them out a lot in the ground game. Caden Fagan leads the team in rushing yards with 306, averaging 4.6 yards per carry, and has 3 rushing touchdowns. He's injured right now, so Aiden Lawry, Josh McCray, and Khalil Valentine have had to step up there. Pat Bryant, Zachary Franklin, Colin Dixon, Hank Beatty, and Josh McCray each have 100 receiving yards or more. Bryant has 7 receiving touchdowns on 510 receiving yards. Tanner Arkin, the tight end, he has 3 receiving touchdowns on the year, second in that category, but he only has 91 receiving yards. And I think he's been a little bit dinged up on the season. Minnesota's tight end leading this season is Jamison Gears with 128 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. Nick Callerup only has 5 receptions, 81 receiving yards. He's their blocking tight end. I think tight end's a push here. I would take Illinois at quarterback. I'd take him at wide receiver. I would take Minnesota on the offensive line because I like their pass blocking. I think they do a much better job compared to Illinois at protecting the quarterback. If you think I'm wrong there, look at Illinois' pass protection in their games. They only allowed 1 sack to Michigan because they didn't pass the ball all that much. They allowed 5 to Purdue. No matter who it is, who they're playing, any of Illinois' defensive opponents have an opportunity to sack Luke Altmaier to death. Any of them. That's not the case with Minnesota and their pass protection. And I also think that Darius Taylor's one of the better running backs in the country. They're just not using him as much in the rushing game, and they're using him a bit more in the passing game in exchange. Defensively, I think that Minnesota has the better overall defense. I do. Even though they have not played the same caliber of offenses that Illinois has had. I think that their pass defense numbers are so exceptional that you have to pay attention to them. I like the Gophers on the interior. I love them at linebacker, and at safety. They've performed at a high level this season. I mean, you look at Minnesota and their true freshman who they have playing in Coy Parrish. He's rated as the #1 safety in the country per Pro Football Focus, and on the season he has 5 interceptions, a forced fumble, and 13 total tackles. And he's a rotational defensive back. I don't know if he's a starter or not, but looking at the depth chart that I have in front of me that was updated just a few days ago per ourlads.com, he's a rotational player. Like he is not a starter. You look at passes deflected, he has no passes deflected. You look at total tackles, he's not even top 10 in that category, and he trails several defensive backs in that DB room in terms of total tackles. Cody Lindenberg, by the way, leads the team in total tackles with 58. So they've done a very good job of developing their DBs, in my opinion. Their safeties, their corners. Justin Wally's having a good year with 2 interceptions. One of them's a pick 6 that he got against Maryland. He has 8 passes deflected, 24 total tackles. Their passing defense is really good, and they have 13 sacks on the year. Typical of a Minnesota defense, you don't get that much pressure. Then again, they'll probably finish the season with more than 20 or around 20. That's typical of PJ Fleck defenses, though. They don't get a whole lot of pressure. At least they don't get home that much on their pressures. But they have 15 interceptions, 37 passes defended, 4 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries. That pass defense is mean. Mean. They will take advantage of anything they can get. They're a scrappy defense. It's similar with Illinois, if I'm being honest. They have 20 sacks on the year, 17 passes defended, 9 interceptions, but they make up for that with 10 forced fumbles and 5 fumble recoveries. And their DBs they're having a good year. I mean, Xavier Scott has 3 interceptions and 2 passes defended, a sack and a forced fumble. Miles Scott has 2 interceptions, a forced fumble, and 2 passes defended. And Torrey Cox Jr. has 2 interceptions. So these defenses here, I think, are better at defending the pass than they are at defending the run. But Illinois has gotten exposed in their pass defense by Oregon, for example, or Purdue. And Michigan at times was even able to complete some passes on them that I thought were a little bit just strange, to say the least, because they don't have a downfield passing offense, or they didn't. They showcased one against Michigan State. I know it's Michigan State, but they did make a quarterback change. They played a good game there. Against Illinois, Jack Tuttle had some awful throws. Hopefully he has a good retirement. He retired from college football, if you guys don't know. And Illinois' secondary at times looked vulnerable against Michigan, and that is not a good thing. You look at these defenses here. Again, Minnesota leads Illinois in a lot of scoring defense categories. They average less points allowed per play, fewer points allowed per game, fewer opponent red zone scoring attempts per game. Minnesota's top 10 there. Illinois is outside the top 80. You look at total defense, Minnesota only allows 4.7 opponent yards per play. Illinois allows 5.8. And you look at run defense, Minnesota's better at stopping the run, and Minnesota's better at defending the pass. Again, 9.5 opponent yards per completion allowed. It's fourth. Illinois allows 11.9 opponent yards per completion, which is 68th. Again, they've played one of the best passing offenses in the country in Oregon. And Penn State's passing offense is no joke either, and they limited that passing offense and did a pretty good job against Drew Aller, that offensive line in terms of pass protection, and Tyler Warren. They did a very good job there in Happy Valley, given all the adversity they faced on both sides of the football. Illinois does do a better job of getting to the quarterback. They have an 8.14 sack percentage on defense. Minnesota only has a 5.69%. Overall, I think the only areas where this is competitive are Illinois' corners. I think Minnesota has some of the best safeties in the country. Coy Parrish, and then Coleman Brycen, Aiden Gausby, nickelback Jack Henderson. They're very deep at safety, but Ethan Robinson and Justin Wally have done a good job. Similar with Illinois corners. At linebacker, I'd take Cody Lindenberg, Maverick Baranowski over Josh Kurtz and Seth Coleman and Dylan Rosiak and Ryan Mead. And on the defensive line, Ezekiel Holmes, Tayra Edwards, Dennis Briggs, and Gabe Jacas. I would take Minnesota's Jaw Joyner, Devin Eastern, Jalen Logan Redding, and Danny Strigo over them. I would. I think Minnesota has the better overall defense here. And as for Illinois, their defense has done a good job at forcing turnovers. I think their secondary is a bit underrated, and they do have some players in the front who can make plays. But I think while Illinois, I would favor offensively overall slightly, I'd favor Minnesota slightly on defense. You look in the trenches, I think that Minnesota with the slightly better O-line, the slightly better D-line is a little bit better than Illinois, but it's close in the trenches. So if you want to have an argument with me that Illinois is better in the trenches, I am going to hear that argument. What is not debatable is that Illinois has a better special teams unit than Minnesota does. They do. They have a more reliable kicker. They've had a better punt game. And again, they've played better competition. So you factor those things in. I think what Illinois has done on special teams this season is pretty impressive. I mean, the fake punt they pulled off against Michigan's an example of that. They're creative. They're willing to rely on their special teams because they know they can win with their special teams. And they've won games with their special teams, by the way, like against Nebraska or against Michigan. Their special teams provided a huge advantage, for example. As for coaching, I would take Brett Bielema over PJ Fleck, just slightly, but again, very competitive. Offensively, I think Barry Looney Jr. is a good, creative offensive mind. But as for Minnesota, I've been impressed with their defense so far this season, and I prefer their strength and conditioning over Illinois'. Just not this season, but also historically. I think that Minnesota has often been one of the better conditioned and developed physical teams in the Big Ten. It's often been their offensive scheme and at times not showing up in big games, like having a turnover, where they really do fall short. I think Corey Heatherman's done a good job on defense. Matt Simon and Greg Harbaugh Jr., I think, have commanded a better offense than they did last season. And their staff that Minnesota has is pretty impressive, but so is Illinois. I think this is going to be a battle of two good staffs that need a win here. And ultimately, I'm taking Illinois in this matchup because they're the home team. I think that Illinois has the more balanced attack on offense. And Minnesota, they do have a good defense. They do. But ultimately, in close games like this, where both teams want to be physical, it's probably going to be low scoring, and they kind of match up with each other well at multiple angles. I think special teams comes in for the win. And at that point, I trust David Alano, Illinois' kicker. I trust him over Minnesota's kicker, Dragan Kesic. Dragan Kesic on the season is 9 of 15 of field goals, 20 of 28 in extra points. He is 2 of 3 from 20 to 29, 3 of 3 from 30 to 39, 2 of 4 from 40 to 49, 2 of 5 from 50 plus with a long of 53. Illinois' David Alano is 13 of 16, 3 of 3 from 20 to 29, 5 of 5 from 30 to 39, 4 of 6 from 40 to 49, and 1 of 2 from 50 plus with a long of 50. Both have good legs. I would probably lean Kesic slightly in his leg power, but Alano's much more accurate, and he has been more reliable in clutch situations. So really with the kicking game in mind, and also the fact that Brett Bielema has had PJ Fleck's number, he has the better quarterback, a quarterback who can compensate for the failures of his O-line. If Illinois is able to get pressure on Brosmer, I have no clue how Brosmer is going to be able to compensate or handle that. And Illinois has also shown that they have the better rushing offense. All those things favoring Illinois, I have to take Illinois here, especially knowing that they are at home. So I'm taking Illinois to win and cover by a score of 23-17. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Kyle OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Awesome Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Make sure to check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Go Gophers, and go Illini.